Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Those are the words written on the Statue of Liberty. Yes, indeed. Oh, I missed him. Just a little too slow. All right. We'll see if he's dumb enough to land there again. We'll read us another one. All right, so in the light of current events, there's a lot of people rearing their evil heads. Anti-Semitism in Israel versus anti-Semitism here versus anti-Semitism in Germany. In Germany, they say, hell no, not again. Never again. Martin Niemöller, German theologian. Friedrich Gustav Emil Martin Niemöller. I have no teeth. I'm sorry that I didn't pronounce that right. Was a German theologian and Lutheran pastor. He is best known for his opposition to the Nazi regime during the late 1930s and for his widely quoted 1946 poem, First They Came. Let's read that poem. You may have heard it before. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Indeed. Oh, this man had a far more interesting life than just that. This man was a U-boat captain in World War I. Became a Lutheran pastor. In World War II, he was put in a concentration camp. 3 of them, actually. Believe it or not, he survived the war. He was born in 1892. January 14th, 1892 in Lippstadt, Germany. Died March 6th, 1984 in Wiesbaden, Germany, and I probably horribly mispronounced that. Sorry about the snorting and nasty. What is the First Amendment of the Constitution?
According to Wikipedia, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution prevents the government from making laws that regulate an establishment of religion, prohibit the free exercise of religion, abridge the freedom.
Oh. Let's find out what it actually says. Why is that part somehow magically missing here? The Bill of Rights. We should probably read those, huh? I've read them before on this channel. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Let's see. La 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 la. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's right, a well-regulated militia. So, why do we have the Second Amendment? Because we have the right to defend ourselves. If our government becomes tyrannical, or if we are invaded by the public, by our neighbors, by foreign governments, we the people's lives and rights shall not be infringed under penalty of the use of our Second Amendment. Who is Fritz Sauckel? Tell me about Fritz Sauckel. That's not it. Tell me about Fritz Sauckel. Well, I guess we can just go to videos, huh? That's not working, is it? FRITZ space SOUCKEL. Well, I was hoping that it would say some of this stuff, but I guess we'll just go to YouTube and find it, won't we? Hans Kammler? He's the German secret weapons manager, and we're looking for... God damn it. Oh. Jesus. Well, I should probably show you why it's so difficult to get through this just to find the Cliffs Notes. Nuremberg trial, day 218, 1946. 141. Fritz Saukel. 10412. That's just from day 143. Here's another one. It's over 2 hours long. Day 142. Here's another one. Day 143, 2 hours, 51 minutes, 53 seconds. This guy was a bad, bad man. You know what he was? He was the head of the Third Reich's forced labor. You know what that means, don't you? It means slavery. And anybody who is convicted of a crime could be used for forced labor. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? Why is it that judges and lawyers, public pretenders, police officers, and even the public spend so much time hating the homeless? We're about to find out. What is the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States?
According to Wikipedia, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime.
Indeed. You can sure tell a lot about a nation by how they treat the most at risk and vulnerable of their society. Every aspect of homelessness is punishable by law. When you have to go to the bathroom, you don't have to march a literal 1.5 miles to do so. When you need to use your computer at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're able to. You don't have to wait for a small window when you might possibly have some help so that you can sit for 3 hours in the public library and hopefully not have your time wasted. Literally not one person has ever gotten a fire under their ass. This is how men are treated in this country. We're not humans. We're expected to do some pretty goddamn Nazi bullshit. I'm not sure if you've heard how many people that I've gone to for help that have talked about beating people up or shooting them as their solution. Well, that sounds like a pretty final solution. Give me a list of anti-homeless laws in America.
Here's a summary from Wikipedia. Laws that criminalize homeless people take on one of 5 forms: restricting the public areas in which sitting or sleeping are allowed, removing homeless people from particular areas, prohibiting begging, and more.
Selective enforcement of laws. Selective enforcement of laws is the very next one on the list. No joke. It says 5 forms. Well, let's read all 5 forms. Anti-homelessness legislation can take 2 forms. Legislation that aims to help and rehouse homeless people, which doesn't. They absolutely don't do that. It says, and legislation that is intended to send homeless people to homeless shelters compulsorily or to criminalize homelessness and begging. You force us to go to places where we're going to be victimized. Yeah. Are you fucking insane? You have this pretty idea in your head. And then there's us living the reality of it. Laws criminalizing behaviors engaged in by homeless people. Laws that criminalize homeless people generally take on one of 5 forms: restricting the public areas in which sitting or sleeping are allowed, removing homeless people from particular areas, prohibiting begging, selective enforcement of laws, selective creation of laws. The French novelist Anatole France noted this phenomenon as long ago as 1894, famously observing that the law, in its majestic equality, forbids the rich as well as the poor to sleep under bridges. That's right. That is right. It's illegal here as well. The difference is that the rich don't have to hide under a bridge to take shelter from the weather. Homeless people find it harder to secure employment, housing, and federal benefits with a criminal record, and therefore penalizing the act of being homeless makes exiting such a situation much more difficult. Although the court's opinion in Jones versus City of Los Angeles, see above, was vacated, the result suggests that criminalizing homelessness may be unconstitutional. Similarly, in response to growing reports of hate crimes, some state governments have proposed the addition of people experiencing homelessness to their hate crime statutes. Well, since there's more hate crimes committed against the homeless than all other hate crimes combined, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Being as people in houses kill homeless people twice as often as people in houses are killed, I'd say that's pretty fucking significant too. These are hate crimes. Police engage in these hate crimes. Judges engage in these hate crimes. Public pretenders and malicious prosecutors engage in these hate crimes. The federal government and state government's legislature are heavily engrossed in these hate crimes. I believe there might be something in here as well as in international law. Since the publication of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Charter of the United Nations, UN, in 1948, the public perception has been increasingly changing to a focus on the human right to housing. And yet, in the United States, we have one type of housing. It's called incarceration. The percentage of the United States population that's homeless is far larger than their claim of almost 600,000. Because the reality is, 81% of those incarcerated were homeless when they were arrested. No money, no resources. Their words not heard because they're too easy to make it a profit. Because these people are not people. These are free American tax dollars that you have to pay. Well, we're so far in debt now that it's your kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids that are going to pay. But whatever. In 1948, the public perception has been increasingly changing to a focus on the human right to housing, travel, and migration as a part of individual self-determination rather than the human condition. The Declaration and international law reinforcement of the Nuremberg trial judgments upholds the right of one nation to intervene in the affairs of another if said nation is abusing its citizens, and rose out of a 1939 to 1945 World War II Atlantic environment of extreme split between haves and have-nots. Article 6 of the 1998 Declaration of Human Duties and Responsibilities declares that members of the global community have individual and collective duties and responsibilities to take appropriate action to prevent the commission of gross or systemic human rights abuses. The modern study of homeless phenomena is most frequently seen in this historic context. Germany, please appeal to the United Nations for help. Actual help. There's nowhere for us to go. We're taken advantage of by our own goddamn government for profit. Help us! Who did the Nazis go after first? I actually had something earlier that I was reading, it was about a week ago, that actually shows the exact dates that they started rounding people up. All right. Meanwhile, beginning in the fall of 1939, Nazi officials selected around 70,000 Germans institutionalized for mental illness or physical. Sorry, it stopped there. Let me read it. Oh, damn. The Holocaust was the state-sponsored persecution and mass murder of millions of European Jews, Romani people, the intellectually disabled, political dissidents, and homosexuals by the German Nazi regime between 1933 and 1945. The word Holocaust, from the Greek words holos, or whole, and kaustos, or burned, was historically used to describe a sacrificial offering burned on an altar. After years of Nazi rule in Germany, dictator Adolf Hitler's final solution, now known as the Holocaust, came to fruition during World War II, with mass killing centers and concentration camps. About 6 million Jews and some 5 million others, targeted for racial, political ideology, and behavioral reasons, died in the Holocaust. More than 1 million of those who perished were children. Now here's the thing. The people that the Germans went after first, before they ever went after the Jews, they went after the homeless and the disabled.
Adolf Hitler was a fanatical leader, a megalomaniac who led his
Having connection issues.
country and many others into the abyss.
Some historians believe that Adolf Hitler thought that his mission in life was to rid the world of Jews. That even if he didn't build the Third Reich for 1,000 years, he would be celebrating for eliminating the Jewish population from the world. I don't know how you begin to deal with that kind of madness, but that's who he was.
Adolf Hitler was born in Braunau am Inn, Austria, on April 20, 1889. Hitler's childhood was an uneasy one. His father died when he was very young.
You scare me when your solution is to kill people, and this is why.
In his pre-war Viennese life, you start seeing the attractions to the anti-Semitic and rabid anti-Bolshevik attitudes.
His name was not Adolf Hitler, it was Schnickelberger, and he was a corporal in World War I. But suddenly he was the man who was giving voice to a long history of German pride. The consequences of World War I for Germany were extraordinary. I mean, the victors, the Western Alliance, placed such penalties on them that they could barely survive. And so they were open to the idea of someone like Hitler who could give voice to their most base fears. And he very cannily knew just how to do that.
Hitler, very quickly after the World War I,
All right, you know what we're going to do, though?
began to engage in political activity, joining and helping start the German Workers' Party in 1919.
This party later became the Nazi Party.
In 1923, Adolf Hitler conspired with other right-wing politicians to overthrow the Republic.
In response to this,
The Weimar Republic. which
Hitler was
eventually
sentenced to prison, where he wrote Mein Kampf, expressing his radical, rabid beliefs.
He was irrationally anti-Semitic, and he was able to use...
Sorry, it keeps freezing up.
Anti-Semitism as a tool for his rise to power.
In January of
1933,
Hitler becomes chancellor. As a result of the fire of the Reichstag in February of 1933, Hitler is afforded wide-ranging police and political powers. He's able really to begin the process of forging the dictatorship, the totalitarian state.
People who thought about international policies were very concerned about what Adolf Hitler was up to. Because you would see those great rallies in the streets of Berlin with hundreds of thousands of people marching in uniform and goose-stepping their way down the Platz and raising their arms in salute to Adolf Hitler. And then he invaded Poland.
He thought the British and the French would not declare war on him, and it would be a quick campaign to subdue Poland. But on September 3rd, 1939, Britain declared war. France followed suit.
In June 1941, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, starting the largest
Nobody fucked the
land
Germans
war
up
in
more than the
history.
Czechs.
In December 1941, Hitler also declared
They were
war
able to
on the
annex
United States.
Czechoslovakia almost
was
without
fought on
violence.
6 of the 7 continents. 50 million people
Same with
perished.
Austria.
The United States, Great Britain, and the Western Allies were aligned with Russia to try to crush Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan.
Hitler felt adamant that it was his duty to mankind to rid the world of all Jews, and he ordered all possible resources and manpower to fulfill this horrendous task in the so-called concentration camps, the death camps.
The Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, marked the turning point of the war. In less than a year, Germany would surrender to the Allies. An estimated 6 million Jews were killed during World War II.
In May of 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide together with his wife Eva Braun, whom he married just before that.
I think of all the tyrants in history, you have to put Adolf Hitler right at the top. He almost destroyed civilization as we know it during the 20th century. I don't think that history will ever forgive him, nor should it. We'll be endlessly fascinated by
But he's not even close to
what
the
A drove
history.
him, and B, why the German people decided to follow him, not just off the cliff, but into the darkest hellhole in history.
The things that George Washington did today would make him a war criminal. Just so you know. Same thing with General Howe. Same thing with General Gates. Same thing with General Greene. Through everything that I've read, pretty much the only 3 generals that wouldn't have to endure that. Well, there aren't 3 of them, there's only 2. Rochambeau and the Marquis de Lafayette. That's right. 2 French generals. One of them operating under the French crown. The other fighting directly under George Washington and Nathaniel Greene. The Marquis de Lafayette was a fucking badass. And he's done more for this country than any American before or since. That's right. He came over here. You know who the 3 Musketeers are, right? It's kind of a fantasy book. But the Black Musketeers of which the Three Musketeers were supposed to be a part, they did exist. And Mr. Gilles, or the Marquis de Lafayette, whatever, right? Yeah, he could have been one of those and had a very, very prestigious place of honor among his people in France. Instead, he chose to turn down a king's commission from King Louis and come over here and serve under General George Washington. He was instrumental in assisting the most famous scientist in the world, arguably, at that time, Benjamin Franklin. You know what it cost France? Well, the American Revolution, much like the invasion of Poland, created a world war. That's right, folks. The American Revolution was truly the first world war. If it had not been for France deciding that it was going to bankrupt itself to keep the Brits busy. And that's exactly what happened to France. They bankrupted themselves, giving the United States its freedom from British rule. The First World War wasn't 1914 to 1918. The First World War started, technically, in 1774. What the United States supposedly once stood for is long gone, replaced by a regime whose only difference between us and the Nazis is that we have learned to make massive amounts of profits off of the misery of others, while making it illegal for them to defend themselves, to protect themselves, or even to cover themselves up. We won't even allow refugee camps in our own country. And we force these citizens to go through such Nazi bullshit paperwork over and over and over again, where it gets us nowhere and we're sent back out onto the streets and told to utilize resources we do not have access to. The United States is showing a lot of anti-Semitism right now at this moment. Oh dang, there's a bunch of youngins. Two of whom took part in throwing pumpkins at me, and now they have a bunch of really, really fucking big pumpkins. Well, let's hope they don't throw it at me. Again. These pumpkins are a lot bigger than the last ones. I should point it over there, but it's a bunch of youngins, and as long as they're not actually throwing them, there's no reason to. Because the police in the United States are as anti-hobo as the Jews are. That's right, even Jewish people in the United States. We can't say Jewish people, though, because that means all Jewish people, doesn't it? But we can say homeless people, as in all homeless people, can't we? Kind of like you say about autistic people. I heard your people are good with numbers. I heard your people are good with math. I heard your people are good with money. It's a stereotype. Same stereotype the Jews have, isn't it? But that's not all. What's the stereotype for Mexicans? Yeah, you pretend that they're all, what? What did Donald Trump say? Rapists? Well, you project that on the homeless too, don't you? You say all Mexicans are thieves, or at least you project it as if they are. And you project that also onto the homeless. A lot of homeless actually have to deal with that from the Hispanic community. Not so much here. Here, the Hispanic community has been taking care of me very well. You also get to hear how I rail against men, and I also rail against women. That's because there becomes a certain point where the anti-Semitic or anti-homeless or anti-Palestinian rhetoric needs to fucking stop. Israel is not trying to be at war with Palestine. They're at war with Hamas. The United States is not fighting a war for their own survival. The countries that they're fighting against are fighting a war for their survival. Germany says, hell no. We're not putting up with this shit again. We remembered what happened last time. 3 and 5 German men ended up fucking dead. That's a pretty significant goddamn number. But it pales in comparison to Russian losses, doesn't it? Many of those people indoctrinated into that belief system. And many more considered political dissidents. Either you agree with the Nazi Party or you end up with the Knight of the Long Knives. You might want to look that up. Many of you don't know the difference between World War I and World War II. Both were over arms manufacturing. In World War I, where did the attack start? Through the Ardennes, because it was supposedly impossible. Where did World War II start? Through the Ardennes, because people thought it was impossible. Where did the Battle of the Bulge happen? In the Ardennes, because everyone thought it was impossible. The Germans had done it twice already by the time they went through for the Battle of the Bulge. There we go. Do you understand the kind of world that we're living in? We cannot tolerate this anti-Israel bullshit any more than we can tolerate this anti-Palestine bullshit. There's a lot of Jews in Israel who are not asking for what you're asking for. Oh, that's probably not long enough. I should probably let it go longer. We want to make sure that it stays charged, don't we? Anyway, I can barely function. Someone has to literally to make the time to listen to me. To say, Sean, I'm going to listen to you right now. And then actually let me speak. Not try to pretend that talking over me is listening, like Shannon Alvarado does. Well, she doesn't anymore. We don't speak. For good reason. She helped predators in this country to get away. The homelessness crisis in this country is fucking disgusting. I want you to take a look at the number of forced laborers just in the state of Mississippi alone. How many of those people are guilty? What do the Germans do? They made a bunch of anti-homeless laws and then locked up all the homeless, and forced them into forced labor or scientific experimentation. This is all well documented. This isn't some conspiracy theory about aliens and the Illuminati and the CIA probes that affect your brain waves and make you think what they want you to. Come on, guys. We're not in the Matrix. Come back to fucking reality. There is no Santa Claus. There is no Easter Bunny. And Jesus is not going to come down here and do what it is that you, as a decent human being, should have done. By the time the German people learned or realized what the fuck was going on, it was already too late. Those in power had already established too hateful of a foothold. All right, we're going to find another person here. German girl killed by the Nazis. Price Anne Frank. Oh no, Sophie Scholl. Bob Keeler. Heidi Ehrlich. Anti-Nazi movement still inspires Germans recall rare courage of White Rose. Ooh, here's another good one. This teenager killed Nazis with her sister during World War II, September 19th, 2018. This teenager killed Nazis with her sister during World War II. Freddie and Truus Overstegen sometimes ambushed Nazi officers from their bicycles. Oh! All right, that's a very interesting one. Now let's look this woman's name up. Sophie Scholl.
According to Wikipedia, Sophia Magdalena Scholl was a German student and anti-Nazi political activist, active within the White Rose nonviolent resistance group in Nazi Germany.
She was convicted of high treason after having been found. Let's read this. Cause of death: execution by guillotine. Let's find out what her crime was. She was convicted of high treason after having been found distributing anti-war leaflets at the University of Munich, LMU, with her brother Hans. For her actions, she was executed by guillotine. Since the 1970s, Scholl has been extensively commemorated for her anti-Nazi resistance work. The United States government targets your children. I can do things that parents cannot do because I have no children to lose. Who is Anne Frank?
According to Wikipedia, Anneliese Marie Frank was a German-born Jewish girl who kept a diary in which she documented life in hiding under Nazi persecution.
She is a celebrated diarist who described everyday life from her family hiding place in an Amsterdam attic. Oh, guess what? She's dead too.
At Ariat, we know our made tough work pants will treat you well because we treat them terrible.
Here we go.
She's one of the most influential, widely read writers of the 20th century, and she never lived to see her book in print, or even to see her 16th birthday. We're talking about Anne Frank, a symbol of resilience and lost innocence in the face of the Holocaust. Anne Frank was born in 1929 in Frankfurt, Germany, the youngest daughter of a Jewish family. Hitler and his anti-Semitic Nazi party rose to power in 1933, and so the Frank family moved to the more tolerant city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. In June of 1940, the Netherlands was invaded by Germany, and conditions for people there, especially Jews, began to deteriorate. The Franks tried to leave for the US, but were blocked from doing so by restrictive immigration policies. Later, on her 13th birthday, Anne received a simple present that would have enormous historical repercussions. It was a blank diary. In it, Anne chronicled her thoughts and feelings, writing about her family and friends and boys, all the kind of things you might expect from a young teenage girl. As Anne began her diary, the situation in occupied Netherlands worsened. Jews were stripped of their rights, forbidden from attending schools, from shopping at most stores, and from taking public transportation. They were subject to a curfew, and they were being sent to work in camps. Faced with these increasingly difficult circumstances, the Franks made a daring decision. They would go into hiding. Their hiding place? A series of unoccupied rooms above the warehouse of the company where Anne's father Otto had worked. In early July of 1942, the Franks fled to this secret annex, while leaving acquaintances to think they'd actually fled the country. The family would attempt to wait out the Nazi occupation. They had help from a small group of friends who brought them food and supplies and kept their secret. But the Franks and others could never leave the annex. They lived in constant fear of discovery and arrest. All this time, for over 2 years, Anne kept her diary. She wrote with a wit and an awareness well beyond her years. Tragically, the Frank family's time in the secret annex came to an abrupt end in August 1944. The Gestapo raided their quarters and sent everyone to concentration camps. The Franks were taken to Auschwitz, and later, Anne and her sister Margot were moved to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany. In the late winter or early spring of 1945, they both died there, most likely of typhus. The only one from the annex to survive the war was Anne's father, Otto Frank. After the end of the war, Otto returned to Amsterdam. One of the women who brought them food while they were in hiding, Miep Gies, gave him a pile of papers and documents she'd rescued from the annex. Among those papers was Anne's diary. Otto was astounded by what he read and sought to bring Anne's writing to a wider public. First published in the Netherlands in 1947, Anne's diary eventually came out in America in 1952 under the title Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. Anne Frank's diary remains one of the most widely read books across the globe. It's been translated into over 60 languages, and over 30 million copies are in print. The world will never forget the story of Anne Frank and her family, and the millions of others who lost their lives in the Holocaust.
The Germans, well, the Nazis, I should say, gave the Germans the impression for some of these people they were after, they're going to take these people where they could get help, where they could get treatment. The so-called mentally ill would get treatment. The Jews were being taken to places where they would be safe. These places were only to keep the Jews safe. Even after Adolf Hitler openly declared his hatred of Jews, people continued to try to believe him. It's the same thing we're doing here in the United States to the homeless. Let's look something else up. What did the Nazis do to the homeless? What did the homeless, what did the Nazis do to the homeless? Homelessness in Germany. Let's see. Nazis used the terms asocial and work shy to categorize together a group of people who did not conform to their social norms. Mosaic of victims. Jews were the primary targets for the mass murder by the Nazis and their collaborators. Nazi policies also led to the brutalization. Well, it seems to me. Let's see, Tennessee State Senator Frank Nicely supported a bill criminalizing homelessness by saying that the Nazi leader, who was homeless at one point, god damn, that's a lot of shit with Nazis, isn't it? Vagrants and beggars in Hitler's Reich. Their first big roundup of the homeless, almost as soon as they came to power in July 1933. That's right, July 1933. Were they rounding up Jews in July 1933? No. No, they started with the homeless. So let's go back to the very beginning of this video. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. Why? So you can treat us like this. So you can pass Nazi laws They give you the same power over us as the Nazis. What did Germany do? Well, they made individual ownership of guns damn near impossible. Then went after the homeless and the quote-unquote mentally ill, just as the United States does. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Never mind that and what you heard. Yep, my voice is squeaky, isn't it? The poem on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Those words today seem to me more like, well, like having a house made of gingerbread and candy. You ever read the story of Hansel and Gretel? The story of Hansel and Gretel. What is the moral of the story of Hansel and Gretel? Never trust strangers, even if they treat you well, apparently. That's what it says here. Ah.
When the bell
Come
comes falling
on.
down and it starts to rain inside your house, call for
Once upon a time, there lived a brother and sister named Hansel and Gretel. Their mother had passed away when they were babies. They lived with their dad in a hut in the forest. Their dad was trying to earn their living by working as a woodcutter and was looking after the kids at the same time. A couple of years passed, and struggling to juggle work and two kids at the same time, their dad decided to get married again. The woodcutter's wife was from...
And she sent them away. That's right. The moral of the story here is, seems to me, the women in this story are the evil ones. Of course, the woodcutter, depending on the version of the story, is also a POS. In some version of the story, she tricks the children, leads them out where she thinks that they'll never be able to find their way home. Yep. The last words of Sophie Scholl. Oh, there's a full film. The last words of Sophie Scholl.
According to Wikipedia, Sophie's last words are disputed, although Else Gebel remembers the last words Sophie said to her as, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? It is such a splendid sunny day, and I have to go."
Indeed. Now, I once made a story about this woman, and I figured with the people who had gotten a hold of me from Germany, maybe if I told the story, they'd correct me. I credited Sophie Scholl's actions to Hannah Reich. Who is Hannah Reich?
According to APM Music,
Wrong one.
Hannah Reich.
Hannah Reich was a German aviator and test pilot. Along with Melita von Stauffenberg, she flight tested many of Germany's new aircraft during World War II and received many honors. Not the same person. Now here's an interesting story for
Is this invention going to put eye doctors out of business? These self-adjustable glasses are taking the world by storm.
Come on.
They let you achieve...
Hannah Reich and Melita von Stauffenberg were the only two women to serve the Nazi Third Reich as test pilots during the Second World War. These women were in many ways similar. They were both brilliant pilots. They had a very strong sense of honour and duty for their nation, although they had a very different understanding of what honour meant. For Hannah Reich, it was blind patriotism. For Melita, it was patriotism for her nation, Germany, but not for the Nazi regime, which she fought to actually help down. Hannah Reich started the war testing a machine called the Gigant, or Giant, which is actually a massive glider. It could take up to 100 armed troops, or even a tank, and the front of it would open sort of a bit like a seed pod, and this tank would come juddering out into action. And she was about 5'4", her head only reached the top of the wheels, and in fact she had to tie wooden blocks to the bottom of her feet in order to be able to reach the pedals to test this machine. From there she tested things called wing blades on the front of bombers, which were designed prototypes to cut through the steel cables that tethered barrage balloons, Britain's main defence against bombers and later against the V1s. She went on to test even the Messerschmitt 163 Comet, which is powered by the combustion of these very unstable fuels, an incredibly dangerous machine that cost the lives of many of the test pilots. Her great skill was in gliding, and these machines would burn their fuel incredibly fast and then have to glide down, and she was testing the gliding landings. This is a V1 here. By 1944, Hannah proposed having a manned version, just like this, but with a little cockpit on the top. And the idea was that then they could target shipping in advance, be very precise in what targets they took out. Essentially, tested a prototype cruise missile. Melita Schiller, Melita von Stauffenberg, as she became her married name, wasn't just a pilot. She was a brilliant test pilot, but she was also an aeronautical engineer. And so she would spend her days developing the equipment for some of the most pioneering military aircraft. For example, she developed the dive sights and the dive brakes for the Junker Ju-87, and she also worked on the 88s. The 87 is the Stuka dive bomber. So these machines They're absolutely extraordinary. They are the machines that are synonymous with the blitzkrieg. They go incredibly fast, and then the way it works is they come high and then they turn and they come down at virtually 80 degrees. This will be at about 350 miles an hour. And they come down to target very individual tanks or particular targets on the ground. And Melita was not just the aeronautical engineer on these things, but also insisted on conducting her own tests. So if a male test pilot would test a dive bomber in the morning, do a nosedive, I mean, that was considered courageous. Melita would test a Stuka dive bomber 15 times in a single day. Did over 2,000 tests during the course of the war. No one else came anywhere near her. So really she was working at the limit of what was humanly possible. As you come down at those speeds, what happens is normally you red out first, so the blood gets forced into your face and into your eyes, and then very often the pilot would black out. So part of the value of Melita's work was the development of the dive brakes, which would automatically kick in, slow the machine and enable it to curve up again and circle back round to the airfield. And this is what saved the lives of many of those pilots. There was a reason why Melita was working so hard, because in 1987, when the Nuremberg laws came in, Melita found out that her father had actually been born Jewish. So she tried to secure not only her life, but to save her family by making herself so valuable to the regime that they offered her what was called equal to Aryan status. So she was working under duress. Later, Melita also worked on the Bf 109, sometimes called the ME or Messerschmitt 109, which was a very versatile plane. It was initially conceived as an interceptor, but it was used in day bombing and nighttime bombing as well. And it was a very pioneering plane. It was enclosed, it had retractable wheels, and Melita worked on it for the blind flying equipment. I think if there's one thing that really comes from this story that is quite simple, it's the absolute hypocrisy of the Nazi regime, who believed that there was only, one space for women really, Kirche, Kuka, Kinder, and there was no place at all for Jews. And yet, when they needed them, they gave 2 women in the very masculine, as they thought, field of flight, the highest honours, the Iron Cross. They're both nominated for the Iron Cross First Class. And they were women, of course, and one of them, the Third Reich themselves, designated as Jewish.
Is there a hidden camera spying on you right now?
What?
When I say hidden camera.
All right. Well, I have a smartphone. I suppose everybody believes there's a hidden camera in it. Well, I can see the cameras on mine. It's not hidden. I utilize it often. The United States is doing a horrible thing to its own people. And the American people are looking the other way. And because the American people are looking the other way, these goods, these services that the American people are busting their asses and paying for are not making it to their intended refugees.